Hey everyone, this is Hugh from Plaguelands Media bringing you, well, not one book review today, but two. I'm going to start looking at the Beast House Quartet by the late horror author Richard Laymon. Now, I became a fan of Richard Laymon when I was in high school, so around the early 90s. It was at a time where I was reading a lot of horror books, but mainly horror books from British authors like James Herbert and Sean Hudson. I read a little bit of Stephen King, very little bit of Dean Koontz as well. And my mother actually borrowed a Richard Laymon book from the library, started reading it, thought this isn't for me, but Hugh might really enjoy it. This was a book called Darkness Tell Us, about a group of students who mess around with a Ouija board and then go off to a mountain in search of buried treasure. And there's some crazy hillbillies living in the mountain that start to dismember all of these hapless college kids. Very entertaining book. Now, Richard Laymon is not the greatest author in terms of writing style. He has a very simplistic writing style, in my opinion. But his early work is very, very good when he's dealing with monsters and ghosts and serial killers and all of this kind of good stuff. Towards the later end of his writing, he sadly passed away in 2001 of a heart attack. He was only aged 54. But towards the later part of his writing, his stories become a little more humanistic. And in my opinion, they're just not as entertaining as the early horror stuff. But this is only the first part. I'm only going to be reviewing the first two books in the Beast House Quartet. That is The Cellar and The Beast House. And then in part two, I will look at The Midnight Tour and Friday Night in the Beast House. So with all of that said, let's get straight into another episode of So the first book in the Beast House Quartet is The Cellar. This was written in 1980. This was actually Richard Laymon's first published novel. And in my opinion, it is a little bit disjointed, but it is still really, really good. Now, I first read this one when I was in high school. Rereading it for this review, looking at it through new eyes, I have more of an appreciation for this book than I previously did. That's not to say it's not without its flaws. Now, the book opens up with basically a grisly killing. A father and his young son have just taken a tour of Beast House, which is this tourist attraction in this small seaside resort town called Mount Casa Point. And while they were on this tour, the son had a little bit of a freak out and wanted to leave. The father, being the dick that he is, I don't want my son being a whiny pussy, and breaks into the Beast House at night. While this is happening, a young police officer named Dan Jensen notices that someone has broken into the Beast House and calls in for backup. But being the small resort town that it is, he basically goes in alone and gets murdered, as well as the father and son, the Ziegler family, I guess you could say, and they all get murdered. So this is the prologue, and it's a very good start to the book, but here is where it gets a little bit disjointed, because it honestly seems like these were two short stories that he just mashed together. So after this killing, we are introduced to Donna and Sandy. These are our basically one pair of our protagonists. Donna has just discovered that her ex-husband, Roy, has been released from prison where he has spent 6 years for raping their daughter, Sandy, when she was 6 years old. So she's now 12. Sandy's now 12. So she grabs Sandy and they just go driving, and they don't really know where they're going. But of course, they're going to end up at Mount Casa Point. While this is happening, we meet our next kind of pair of protagonists, Larry and Judd, or Judgment, if you really want to use his full name. Now, Larry was actually a survivor of a Beast House attack in the 50s, and Judd is pretty much a mercenary for hire, and they happen to be living next door to each other in the same apartment building. And Larry's having night terrors. He meets Judd. The night terrors, of course, brought on by the recent killings that have made the newspaper, the Ziegler family and the cop Dan Jensen. So Judd agrees to go with Larry to Mount Casa Point and hunt down and kill the beast once and for all. And there we have our four protagonists. Roy has come to Donna and Sandy's house looking for them, but of course they are not there. So he goes on this little bit of a murder spree and kidnaps a young girl after killing her parents, and then proceeds to travel with this young girl who he spends time torturing and molesting on the road. Thankfully, Richard Laymon doesn't go into details with this, but it is enough. It is implied enough that you do feel uncomfortable as you're reading it. So at Mount Casa Point, we have Beast House. Beast House is, as I said before, a tourist attraction where the owner, Maggie Kutch, takes tours of the house where her two sons and husband were brutally killed by the beast. Of course, people kind of mock this and laugh at it, but at the same time, she has set up this tour and she does narrate the history of the Beast House, which we find out was actually built by a woman called Lily Thorne in 1903. Lily Thorne's husband was a bank robber and bandit. That's where she got her money from. Her two young sons, when he dies, she comes to Mount Casa Point and builds this mansion. Her two young sons are ostracized by the town because of who their father is. Ultimately, she starts a relationship up with the town doctor, but things go south very, very quickly. I will get into that a little bit later on. So Sandy and Donna and Larry and Judge meet in Mount Casa Point. They actually go on the Beast House tour together, but they don't know each other yet, although there is heavy implications that Donna wants to fuck Judd the first moment that she sees him. And this is a theme that is very prevalent in all of Richard Laymon's books, this love at first sight, lust at first sight kind of concept. Because back in the day, contrary to popular belief, every good horror novel needed to have gratuitous sex scenes. It was just something that horror authors did back then, linking sex and death. We see it all the time in horror movies, body genre films. So the same goes for novels. Ultimately, what ends up happening is the four of them kind of meet. Roy is on his way to Mount Casa Point for a showdown with his ex-wife, hoping to get back his daughter to do some very horrible things to her, no doubt. There's a lot of kind of stuff where Judd is scoping out the Beast House. He gets his hands on a diary, Lily Thorne's diary, the woman who actually built Beast House. And it is discovered that ultimately, spoiler alert, by the way, if you don't want, you know what, if you don't want spoilers, don't watch the rest of this fucking review. But ultimately, we find out that Lily Thorne had stopped kind of this affair with the doctor because she was being fucked by this beast, which is described as like white, pale skin, albino, dog-like, with a giant penis that has another little mouth in it, kind of like the xenomorph's extra kind of protrusion, but coming out of the beast's dick. So she has been basically this beast has been coming to her every night and fucking her, and she's loving it. And ultimately, she is responsible for the death of her 2 sons, even though another man was hanged for that crime. And then we skip ahead, and in the 50s, when Maggie Kutch kind of moves into the Beast House, and this cycle starts over again, where the Beast is having sex with her as well, because the Beast is insatiable, blah, 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 blah. Ultimately, what ends up happening is they all go into the Beast House at night to put an end to everything. Roy comes to Malcassa Point, tries to kidnap Donna and Sandy, but Judd, being who he is, overpowers him. This is after Roy has actually kidnapped the daughter of the Welcome Inn where they're staying, the daughter of the owners of the Welcome Inn, and has molested her. She ultimately escapes and does survive, as does the little girl that Roy has kidnapped at the beginning of the book. So they take Roy to the Beast House, hoping the Beast rapes him, because for some reason the Beast just likes fucking things. It's heavily implied that when Larry was a kid, he was raped by the Beast as well. And ultimately what ends up happening is one of the worst endings of a horror novel ever, where Larry is killed, Judd is killed, Roy is killed, Donna and Sandy are kidnapped by Maggie, and at the end of the book, it's implied that they are living in Maggie's house, which is built across from the Beast House with no windows, so you can't see what's inside, and that the Beast has been having sex with them, and that Donna is pregnant with the Beast's child. What struck me about this ending is not so much the fact that it was like a shock ending. Early Richard Laymon books did this all the time. But it was the fact that Sandy, the 12-year-old girl, was so quick to enjoy getting raped by the Beast. And she's talking to her mother, which one do you like better? I like this one, but I don't know if this one's the father. It was just a fucking stupid ending, okay? But it was Richard Laymon's first novel, and he ultimately went on to write a lot more of them, so I cannot fault him for that. That is The Cellar, Book 1 of the Beast House Quartet, which goes on to Book 2, The Beast House. Now, this was written in 1986, I believe this one was written in. And I have to say that when I read The Beast House in high school, didn't enjoy it. When I read it now, really enjoyed it. And the reason I enjoyed it is because he ties up a lot of loose ends that we had in The Cellar. This one kind of opens with the daughter, Joni, that was, Joni, whatever. Anyway, the girl who was kidnapped by Roy, the daughter of the motel owners, is corresponding with a horror author, a man who has become famous from writing a non-fiction horror book. And she has her hands on the diary of Lily Thorne, and she wants to basically sell the rights to this author to make some money. And so the author, this man named Gorman Hardy, and his associate, Brian, they end up traveling to Malcassa Point to meet with Janice and to see basically if this diary is real. So they are two of our main characters, well, three of our main characters, I should say. The real main characters of this story are Nora and Tyler. Nora is a librarian who, her and Tyler were at a librarian conference together. They're best friends. I guess librarian conferences were a thing back in the 80s. I don't know. And Tyler was the ex-girlfriend of Dan Jensen. And it's been a long time since she saw Dan. They broke up about 5 years ago. So they decide, let's make a quick trip to see how Dan is doing, maybe rekindle that old flame, because Tyler always believed that her breaking up with Dan was the biggest mistake that she made. Dan, of course, being the cop who gets slaughtered at the beginning of The Cellar. So there's a nice little callback there to that. As they are driving to Malcassa Point, they have a run-in with a redneck in a pickup truck who proceeds to basically run them off the road and then start hitting them with a broken antenna and threatens to rape them until two former Marines who had done 3 tours of Nam come to their rescue. This is Josh and Abe. So we have 2 guys, 2 girls. Are they going to hook up? What do you fucking think? Of course they are. So they all drove up to Malcassa Point, and one thing kind of leads to another, and Tyler discovers that Dan is dead. She discovers it in the worst way possible. He is now a wax dummy in the Beast House on the tour, and she freaks out. And then Abe takes it upon himself to get to the bottom of how Dan died and why Dan died, and makes friends with the local Malcassa Point police. All the while, Gorman Hardy has written up a contract to split the proceeds of this Beast House book. He's going to write 50-50 with Janice, the girl who has been corresponding with him. I'm sure it is Janice. Yes, Janice. Okay. But Gorman Hardy, the author, is a fucking asshole. And so he gets his associate to seduce her, take her away for the evening where he can break into her room and tear up the contracts. This doesn't end well for his associate Brian, and it doesn't end well for Janice either. So what you have is you have this idea that reoccurring characters from the first book are coming back. We even get a glimpse of Sandy. She is now working the ticket booth at Beast House, and we find out that her mother has a young baby called Judd, named after the guy from the first book that she miraculously fell in love with in the span of 12 hours. So what ultimately ends up happening is Abe and Josh break into Beast House at night to get some photographs for Gorman Hardy, who is paying them a lot of money to do so. And they run into Janice, who is trying to escape from Beast House. They manage to get her out, and they call the police, and then it becomes a fucking action story. The cops descend on the Beast House. Maggie, who runs the Beast House tour, starts fucking shooting everyone. We find out there's not one beast, but there's 3 of them. And everything kind of hits the fucking fan. But not everyone dies in this book. We have side characters like Captain Frank, who is your typical small town drunk who likes telling stories, but we find out that his father actually bought the original beast back from a sea voyage. The beast came from an island off the coast of Australia, you know, because all of our animals down here, they actually make a point of saying it's possible because most Australian animals are fucking weird, like the kangaroo and the platypus and the wombat. Like, all right, fair enough, whatever. All of the 4 main characters, Nora, Tyler, Abe, and Josh, they all live. Tyler and Abe get married, have kids. Janice survives, ends up writing the Beast House book herself and making millions and millions of dollars off of it. It was a really good kind of sequel to The Cellar because it didn't follow the same beat counts as The Cellar did. Sure, we get the same tropes happening. Tyler and Abe have known each other for all of 3 hours before she's madly in love with him. And that's fine, but it's not the same book. It's evolved. And you can read them separately, and that's perfectly fine. Reading them together I think, is the best way to do it. I have a better appreciation for his writing, as simplistic as it is. His storytelling, the characters that he creates. He even, at one point, goes so far as to try and set up, very much like Stephen King does with Castle Rock and with Derry, tries to set up this world. There's references in the Beast House that at the end of the book, that the corpse of one of the beasts gets taxidermized and put in the motel lobby, kind of to draw tourists in, but then it gets stolen and it later shows up at the Funland amusement park in Beleaguer Bay, which is the setting for another one of Richard Laymon's novels called Funland. So you see that he's kind of connecting all of his novels together at this point. And he's been writing at this point for 6 years. And really you can see that his work is actually getting better as it goes along. Now, this is only part one of this review. I still have 2 more books in the series to read and review, and so that will be coming up soon. But I highly recommend checking out some Richard Laymon if you just want quick, easy horror thrills. It's the way to go. They're a lot of fun, and most of them have been reprinted now. His short story collections and a lot of his other novels. He has written some absolutely fantastic books. One Rainy Night, possibly one of my favorites, Resurrection Dreams, sorry. Really good one as well. The Woods Are Dark, another good one. So Richard Laymon, going to recommend him to anyone that just wants a quick horror thrill. Not as polished as Stephen King, but you do have to remember, and this actually, I actually wanted to do a video on this point, and I might in the future. We get books now, and we get a new generation of readers, you know, coming up and reading books and everything, and they don't go back to the influences. I believe I talked about this when I talked about Conan. Sure, these books were written in the 80s, and it was a different time. You can really see these are kind of dated in their descriptions and what the characters say and what the characters do. But that's half the fun, is trying to find their place in the grand scheme of things. I mean, you can read a book set today and immediately you understand, okay, so this is a modern book. They've got cell phones, they've got electric cars, they've got this, they've got that. But when you look at books, especially, and this is especially true of horror novels, that were written, you know, in the 70s and 80s. Shit, I would even go back to, you know, Bram Stoker's Dracula, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, even books like War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. They do date themselves, but there's something intrinsically fun in reading books like this and in your mind trying to set them up in such a way that you yourself as the reader understand where the author is coming from. There's something challenging about it, but I don't think a lot of people today, especially younger readers who are coming up after suckling on the tits of J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series or the Twilight novels, and I'm not saying this in a bad way, the Harry Potter series is fucking awesome, but they don't want to do the work when they read a book. Half of them don't even want to read a fucking book. So they are dated, but they're fun. And that's all that fucking matters when you're reading stuff like this. These are airline novels. These are travel books. You read them on a train. You read them when you're going somewhere. And sure, we are in the era of COVID where not a lot of people are traveling. All the more reason to just go out there and read a fucking book, people. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Stay tuned for part 2. If you haven't subscribed, you're a fucking idiot. So do it now. Click the button, click for notifications, Follow us on Amazon. Follow us on Redbubble. Follow us on playgroundsmedia.com. Follow us on Facebook. If you're not doing any of that, well, can't help you. Stay safe. See you in the next video.